Thanks. So welcome to the Last Drop Water Researcher Speaker Series. If you have an interest in water sustainability issues, the speaker series is for you. So the Last Drop Speaker Series is brought to you by the University of Manitoba's Sustainable Development Goal 6 Working Group. In 2018, the University of Manitoba was named the United Nations Academic Impact Hub, or the UNAI Hub, for Sustainable Development Goal 6 on clean water and sanitation. So the SDG 6 Working Group at the U of M brings together established and emerging leaders who have shared an interest in freshwater sustainability and who work collaboratively with local, national, and global partners to address issues related to water. Members include researchers from across campus, including the Clayton H. Riddell Faculty of Environment, Earth, and Resources, Faculty of Agriculture and Food Sciences, Faculty of Architecture, Faculty of Arts, the Price Faculty of Engineering, Faculty of Science, as well as collaborators from the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning, the Center for Human Rights Research, and the Center for Earth Observation Science, as well as the Office of Sustainability. So the SDG Working Group's expertise spans multiple disciplines, including leading researchers across the humanities, social sciences, and STEM fields. My name is Nicole Wilson. I'm an assistant professor and Canada Research Chair in Arctic Environmental Change and Governance at the Center for Earth Observation Science in the CHR Faculty of Environment, Earth, and Resources. And I co-chair this group with Claire Herbert, who's also online today. In this virtual format, we are all coming from different locations. Many of us will be in Winnipeg, but some of us may be elsewhere. So I want to acknowledge that today I'm located in Winnipeg, Manitoba, within Treaty 1 and on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Inanuak, Anisiinanuak, Dakota Yate, and Dene, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. In the theme of today's panel or session, I also want to acknowledge that my drinking water comes from Shoal Lake through the Winnipeg Aqueduct, which was constructed in 1919 at the expense of Shoal Lake 40 First Nations water security. Today we're going to be having a talk by Dr. Donghoon Lee. Before we begin, I'll just mention some logistics. So we've enabled the closed captioning function, so please feel free to turn that on as needed. We will be recording this event and hosting it on our Sustainability YouTube channel after the talk. So Sarah Deckert from the Center for Human Rights Research will put the link to that YouTube channel in the chat. The presentation will be about 30 minutes and there'll be time for a Q&A period at the end. So please put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll work through those. Finally, I'd like to say for the members of the audience who want to learn more or join the SDG 6 Working Group, you can visit our website. Sarah will also put the link to that in the chat. And you can also find a list of our previous talks in the Last Drop Water Speaker Series from the past 2 years. So now let's begin. Donghoon Lee will be presenting on forecasting for disaster resilience and food security. Dr. Donghoon Lee is a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair and an assistant professor in the Department of Civil Engineering and at the University of Manitoba. Before joining Dr. Lee was a postdoctoral researcher at the Climate Hazard Center at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Lee's research enhances our understanding of both short and long-term climate risks and their effects on human society across various sectors such as water, agriculture, disaster management. He applies climate, environmental, and societal data to quantify their interactions and tackle challenges arising from climate change. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic over to Donghoon Lee. I'm very much looking forward to this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, for your kind introductions. It's a pleasure to be here today to share my work with you. For your information, so I joined the University of Manitoba in January 2024. So most of the content of my presentation represent the research I have conducted over the years in the United States. And sorry for my voice. I just got a cold. But I will try to my best. And the title of my talk is Forecasting for Disaster Resilience and Food Security. It also encompasses aspects of water resources and disaster management. And although my research does not directly address the water quality or sanitations, but you will find it intersects with many other sustainable development goals. I'd like to take a moment to introduce my research approach. So my research focuses on leveraging hydroclimate information to enhance the management strategies across the various sectors, including the water management and disaster response and agriculture. Specifically, I develop and use seasonal forecast that predicts hydroclimate conditions over the next 3 to 4 months. And I also incorporate the social components to assess and predict their impacts on society. So I use a seasonal hydroclimate forecast and evaluate the impacts on society and improve the management and adaptation strategies. And I apply this research framework at both local and global scales. For example, I analyze the water supply and disaster preparedness for effective water and disaster management. And also I assess the crop yield and food insecurity forecast to evaluate the food security in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, so I prepared 2 themes. So first theme is water and disaster management. Just for your background, so this is a typical disaster management cycle. So we have 4 phases. First phase is preparation, which is pre-disaster management. And after hazard event, we have 3 following phases, including response and recovery and mitigations. All these management activities require the cost, and our overall goal is minimizing these costs and the impacts from the hazard. So how can you use the forecast for disaster management? So typically we have 2 types of the forecast. So first one is short-term and second is long-term. The short-term forecast up to weeks and is relatively accurate. And based on the short-term forecast, we can take emergency preparedness, contingency plans, and warning evacuations. The long-term forecast is up to months and is probabilistic information. And based on the long-term forecast, we can take early actions. For example, we can pre-position relief items, or we can take a pre-emergency fund. We can request a pre-emergency funding, which is very important steps. We can also create the insurance contracts. And throughout the years, and then studies have discovered that found that these long-term forecast-based actions could reduce the mortality, damages, and cost. So my research is developing the long-term hydroclimate forecast and evaluating the benefits, its benefits for disaster management. So initially, we have focused on the flood disasters. So we characterize the global stream flows and create the prediction models. So in these studies, we define major and minor high flow seasons. So high flow seasons were flood seasons. So the map on the left is our defined major and minor high flow seasons for different seasons. For example, April, May, June, July, August, September, and October, November, December. The blue colors represent our primary flood seasons, and green colors represent secondary flood seasons. And we define this based on the global hydrological models. We also compare our defined high flow seasons with actual flood records on the right here. So these are the accumulated flood records. This is observations from the Dartmouth Flood Observatory. So we found strong similarities between these 2 products. Globally, we found our defined high flow season shows 80% of accuracy with observations. Also, for the first time, we introduced bimodal floods, which indicating the secondary flood season. So this map is showing the example of bimodal floods in East Africa. So you can see the May, August, November, our major and minor high flow seasons are well captured, all the floods records in this Horn of Africa. Second, we Secondly, we characterize the global stream flow with large-scale climate drivers like ENSO, El Niño sudden oscillations. So the figure here is a little bit complicated, but all the colors represent anomalous patterns of precipitations, rainfall, and runoff stream flow, as well as soil moistures. And then for the different seasons, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. We particularly focused on identifying these symmetric patterns between ENSO phases. For example, above normal stream flow in La Nina years and below normal stream flow in El Nino years is represented as the red colors, and the blue colors represent the opposite case. And then we evaluate the driving mechanism, driving hydrological mechanisms for those symmetric patterns. For example, here, these symmetric patterns are derived by precipitations, PR, or snow melt and soil moistures, and soil and snow melt here. And then we also found the lagged impacts of the hydroclimate drivers. For example, in June, July, August here, we can see the symmetric patterns over the northeastern parts of the United States. This is Columbia River basins. These symmetric patterns is not derived from the concurrent, is derived from the one season ahead, March, April, May snowfall amount. So we evaluate all these physical mechanisms for these symmetric patterns. And based on this understanding and characterizations, we developed the prediction models. For these maps, the yellow colors represent ski scores, our fair predictions. So blue colors represent good predictions. And this is example of fair predictions of seasonal stream flow at the Blue Nile River at Khartoum and Sudan. Darker colors are our predictions and light colors are observations. And as you can see, our predictions well capture the trends and variabilities of the observations. And this is an example of the good predictions at Swan River at Florida. As you can see, our predictions will capture the most of peaks of observations. Although we only use the largest scale climate drivers and some autocorrelations, our statistical model shows fair to good prediction skills over 1/3 of stations and land area. At this point, it was very promising result. Okay, now let's shift our focus to disaster management. So I'd like to introduce the Red Cross Climate Center's the forecast-based financing initiative. This innovative program allows humanitarian fundings to be accessed for early actions based on the forecast information and risk analysis. The key takeaway here is that taking proactive actions before a disaster event significantly reduce the impacts and recovery cost compared to the traditional post-disaster responses. And on the right, you will see a figure that illustrates this process. It's complicated, but the core concept is straightforward. Once a forecast hits the predetermined threshold, it automatically triggers the early action protocols or EAPs. The Red Cross successfully developed these EAPs and these protocols for various natural hazards in numerous countries. And we have focused on the flood disasters, the EAPs for flood disaster in Peru, at particularly these two locations, Piura in Costa region here, and also Maranon stations at the Amazon River basin. In this particular site, we focused on evaluating the performance of various forecast models in accurately triggering EAPs over the years, so including statistical and dynamical and multimodal approaches. This is a case, I believe this is for the case of Maranon stations. And in this case, our analysis revealed that our statistical model outperformed the other models. Additionally, we found that the multimodal approach is more effective for Piura River basins with a certain threshold. So we implemented this kind of the forecast models and threshold in each of EAP, only action protocols at those regions. In Bangladesh, we developed the social health vulnerability based on the socioeconomic and demographic and public health indicators from their national census. So this is a social health vulnerability. On the map on the right is our prediction of affected populations based on the local flood forecast and then population data as well as satellite inundations. And then we merge these two maps together and create this forecast-based vulnerability. This is our impacts forecast. And then we compare with observed flood impacts. For example, distress means mortality and affected populations and damages on buildings and disruptions in health and educational facilities. And health indicates a number of injuries and infectious disease, etc. And throughout this analysis, we identified a significant relationship that demonstrate our ability to create actionable predictions for socioeconomic and public health impacts. We also conducted similar analysis for Peru. Excuse me. So we identified the vulnerability patterns in 6 ecoregions in Peru. So based on the national census data, we also created the social vulnerability. We put that into that social vulnerability on the y-axis here. And then, as you can see in the maps, we have the Andes Mountains within the country. So the elevation is key environmental factor in Peru. So we put that in the horizontal axis, and the colors represent the major provinces. And then scatter plot represents each of 6 ecoregions in Peru. For example, Amazon rainforest, coastal desert mountain steppes, and equatorial dry forest and high forest. We discovered a lot of interesting features from this analysis, but in general, we found that very distinct vulnerability patterns in each of ecoregions. We also found increasing vulnerability at higher altitudes. For example, here in the coastal desert, mountain steppes, and equatorial dry forest and high forest, essentially this tells that there are poor socioeconomic conditions status in higher altitudes. We also evaluated the inequality of vulnerability in urban and rural areas in Peru. So based on the average vulnerability, I sorted the provinces on the y-axis. So top provinces are more vulnerable regions, and the bottom provinces are less vulnerable or wealthy regions. And then higher inequality index indicates the vulnerability within that regions distributed unequally. And throughout this analysis, we found, as we expected, we found higher inequality in their vulnerabilities in more vulnerable regions, which makes sense. We also found significant vulnerability disparities between urban and rural areas in less vulnerable regions here. We also found some high inequality in some urban areas in more vulnerable regions. For example, here we can see a high inequality in Cusco. So the Cusco is tourism city. So within that urban areas, there is some strong disparity in vulnerability disparity. Okay, so I do have one slide for the water resources management. This is for our applications of seasonal forecast for maximizing global hydropower productions. So the map on the top left, we have developed our dam inflow predictions for about 700 headwater dams in the world. And then we characterize the dam properties with the predictability. For example, is filling time is more important compared to the hydraulic dams? Or how about the exceeding turbine release versus predictability? and we identified the key properties of dams for maximizing hydropowers. And then the maps on the bottom left is showing the location of the dams with the potential hydropower. So additional hydropower from that key properties, key features of dams. And then the colors represent these dams, whether those dams have a good forecast and poor forecast. So we are from this analysis, we suggest we indicated that these dams have a potential to gain additional hydropowers, but it has good forecast, poor forecast. So we need to improve our forecast, or we need to for these sites, or also for the new dams, we also need to consider this, incorporate these key properties to maximize the additional hydropowers. Okay, this is a second theme, agriculture and food security. I'd like to introduce the FuseNet. The FuseNet is early warning system networks created by USAID. And then FUSE was the first international humanitarian program to use remote sensing data for their aid activities. FuseNet has a lot of science partners, and I was working at the Climate Hazard Center at the UC Santa Barbara as a postdoc. Like Red Cross, FuseNet used their own evidence-based scenarios to provide the decision makers with early warning about the potential food security crisis. So they have 8 steps for their scenario assessment. I'm not going to go through all the details, but as a science team members, we are focusing on this third step, development of key assumptions. So we are providing our monitored and forecast products to support their development of key assumptions. And then throughout this scenario assessment, we consider a lot of factors, including food price, crop price, and then crop conditions, and also conflicts. And based on all these informations, we created IPC, integrated phase classifications. So the map here is showing the IPC for the June, July, August, September in 2024, so the last season for Sub-Saharan Africa. You can see the stressed or crisis conditions in East Africa or Southern Africa due to the severe drought conditions. Also, you can see the crisis and emergency conditions in Sudan and South Sudan, mostly due to their conflicts between the countries. And particularly, my research was focusing on projecting the crop conditions. So we used the Earth observations for crop yield forecasting. So here, the crop yield is crop productivity per unit area. So basically, we are using a lot of Earth observation products, for example, precipitations, reference evapotranspirations. NDVI refers to vegetative conditions, and also we use temperature data sets. And then we extract the EO features based, for example, number of dry days, growing degree days, or number of days precipitation above a certain threshold. And then the bottom maps is showing the climate conditions, precipitation, NDVI, evapotranspirations for the East Africa for October, November, December in 2022, which has severe drought conditions, particularly in Kenya and Somalia, here and here. And this is our modeling framework. So this is a Kenya, this example. So in each district, based on a lot of our observation features, we developed the forecast models in each 10 days throughout the growing seasons. And this figure is showing our forecast skills. So the higher blue and lower red means better predictions, and the green lines are representing the vegetative period in the growing seasons in Kenya and Somalia. We found very increasing skills during the vegetative period, which makes sense. And in general, we found a very skillful forecast around the end of the best year period and after growing season, which is very promising result. We also evaluate the model's ability to for the historical drought years. So we made the hindcast for particular drought years. So this is out of sample prediction skills for 2011, which was a severe drought year. And then our forecast shows very high accuracy of crop yield. And then based on our work, we developed the operational system. So this slide is basically showing what kind of yield products and yield features that we are using. We also apply the crop mask. So for example, we are considering the Earth observations only within the cropped area. So for example, here, the blue and green regions here. And then we aggregate all these informations and create a time series to feed our operational forecast models. We also developed a bureau, forecast bureaus for our stakeholders. So this is one example. So here, the stakeholders and users can see all the observations conditions for particular years. This is for 2022 March. So you can see some drought conditions in Kenya and Somalia here, and also Malawi. And so users or stakeholders can also browse our hindcast for that particular events. So this is the same our hindcast for that particular month, which also shows the drought conditions and then reduce the crop productivity over the Kenya, Somalia, and Malawi. And we also practice this operational forecasting for Southern Africa in 2023-2024 season. In the late 2023, we expected very strong El Nino events, and this typically brings very drought condition in Southern Africa. So in the top maps, you can see very drought precipitation deficit for the 4 strong El Nino years. So we know this information. So, and as we expected, we try to have a practice of predicting the crop yield throughout the seasons. So, and for these southern countries. So the map on the left is showing the mean maize productions for these regions. And you can see high production regions in South Africa, which is called the maize triangle. This accounts for around 60 to 70% of the maize production over these regions. And based on our composite and then composite maize yield forecast, we expected about 20 to 30% of reductions over these regions. And then we delivered this information to our stakeholders for the food insecurity assessment. And I got this image from my colleagues, and after I moved to my institution to University of Manitoba. So they are using, so this is a monthly FuseNet seasonal forecast review meeting to support the key assumption for development of key assumptions. They're actually, so this is updated our forecast products, and then they're also comparing with other forecast products from other science teams, and they aggregate the informations to develop their own key assumptions for the food security assessment. And it was very good moment to see our products is actually used by our stakeholders. And then this is my last slide. Throughout the years, we also realized that we have very limited public subnational crop statistics, which really hampers this larger scale analysis. So luckily, FuseNet has collected such crop statistics datasets from the source documents from the agriculture ministries and national statistics agencies. They also built the database of these informations. So on top of their database, we created the Harvested Africa datasets, uh, which is ready to analyze subnational crop statistics. We apply the quality control standardizations, calibrations, and quality evaluations. So far, this is the largest open source crop statistics datasets to date. Yeah, and then this is the map here is showing the current data coverage. So we have crop statistics for the most of countries in sub-Saharan Africa, but not all the countries have the long-term stable data records. So the figure here is showing the number of data points over the time of each country. So we have a major crop data statistic from around the middle of 1990s to 2020, but it's enough to analyze the crop yield predictions. So yeah, we have a link for our GitHub repository. We also have a preprint for these data sets on the Arts archive. So you're welcome to browse that. And just for my research summary, so my research has applied the hydroclimate forecast to enhance the strategies and different sectors, including water resources management and disaster preparedness and food security assessment. And we have tried to tailor our information to account for societal and infrastructure impacts. And at the University of Manitoba, I plan to investigate the long-term impacts of the climate change, also particularly at the Manitoban and Canadian domains. Yeah, and yeah, this is all I have today, and I hope my talk has provided valuable insights and spark your interest in these important topics. And yeah, thank you for your attentions, and I welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So we have our Q&A open. So I don't have any questions in there, but for anybody who does have a burning question, I encourage you to submit it into the Q&A and we'll ask Donghoon about that. So while we're waiting on that, so Donghoon, I come from a very different disciplinary background than you as a much more qualitative social scientist, but also thinking about, the relationship between climate change and water. And so I'm curious about the kind of vulnerability indices or index that you use. So, your vulnerability assessments can be helpful at clarifying these like complex factors that help explain why, say, particular households, groups, or regions are more prone or less able to respond to climate stresses. But they've also, from a more like critical social science perspective, been critiqued for sometimes narrowly framing some of these issues. For example, not necessarily accounting for social inequality along lines of gender, income, race, ethnicity, and then thinking about root causes. And so, such as, just the historical context and power relationships between different groups. So this is kind of the thing I think about. So I'm so curious, like you mentioned that you use a social vulnerability index. So I'm curious what went into that. I assume it wasn't one that you developed, but that analysis you were doing where you went a little bit more in depth into Peru and stuff like that. I'm curious how you work with these things.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. Yeah, I expected you might have that questions. So for the social vulnerability, we use various socioeconomic and demographic factors, like including all the income levels and also the ages, genders. But yeah, so it depends on the data quality. So we we retrieved all the data from their national census. But the methodology for creating that social vulnerability, like a composite map, is more important. Sometimes people do the surveys with our stakeholders to weight that the indicators. Sometimes we use just equal weights for all the 20 or 30 indicators. So in the paper, we compared those, we actually did all the analysis and surveys, but the oftentimes we found the equal weights for the social vulnerability is easy to create, also easy to communicate with the stakeholders, and is relatively not biased by the surveys. So we often I prefer the equal vulnerabilities, but yeah. My point is that the methodology for quantifying that vulnerability, social vulnerability, is more important, and then indicators is mostly depends on the data availability. But the most of countries, many countries have their national census, so we can leverage that.
Right. Of course. That's great to learn about. And so
Mhm.
in the chat or in the Q&A, we have another question. If you have any ideas about applying socioeconomic metrics in Canada, maybe to do a similar analysis.
Yeah, actually, I forgot the name of the agencies, but Canada, there is a geological survey in Canada. So they developed a social vulnerability. So actually, the similar analysis for entire Canada regions. So they, based on the Statistic Canada's national census data, they created the social vulnerability maps, and they link to the specific natural hazard to see the to identify the regions have higher vulnerability to that specific natural hazard.
Okay, great. And do you have any plans to build on this with your work?
Yeah, actually, yes, I do have. So one interesting is the changes this social vulnerability over times. So we use the same approach to calculate the social vulnerability, but we use uh, the national census data over 20 or 30 years to see the changes in the vulnerability metrics at the same locations.
Okay, and just to follow on by Marcos again,
Mhm.
Marcos Cordero, have you examined the hydropower forecast in Manitoba? If so, do you foresee any implications for Indigenous communities?
I have not, but I do have that plan to make a forecast models and then make a operational models for Manitoba. Uh, and then implications for indigenous populations. I have not specific plans for that, but yeah, one of the consideration is that I know the 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 dam build has high influence uh, the indigenous populations. So one consideration is maximizing the operations to see it is necessary to build dams for the futures. That could be the one ideas, and then to see the climate conditions, future climate conditions. Uh, I have that ideas of considering the future climate conditions to see we can meet the enough water supply for all the municipalities and also indigenous populations in the future.
Mhm. Yeah, lots to unpack thinking about the
Yeah,
justice issues related to Indigenous peoples, and I recognize that's not your area of focus or
yeah, but
expertise.
yeah, I realized that that considerations, that component is very important, particularly in these areas.
Yeah, for sure. Not seeing any further questions in the Q&A, but I do know there's quite a few students online with us today. So I'm just curious, for the group. Could you tell us, how did you get into this kind of work? How did you decide that this is the kind of work you wanted to do?
Very interesting question. So, uh, I work with the Red Cross Climate Center. So we found that the Red Cross has that forecast-based financing programs, and then immediately I was so fascinated. I was super interested in that. So I tried to build my ideas to support that program and that FVF initiatives. So we basically I actively moved. So we contact the climate center, Red Cross climate centers, and we made a collaborations. Uh, that's the way I focused on these uh, early actions activities for natural disasters, and then I moved to the agriculture sector, so with USAIDs and FuseNets, and so it's like a transition from natural disaster to food security. But I found that their methodologies of using this hydroclimate informational forecast for their early action mechanisms is similar. I thought it's like very similar. So I try to support uh, their management strategies. So that's my uh, history, and yeah, that was my steps to get into this field.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And I'm not seeing any more questions, so I'd just like to thank you for your talk and to thank everybody else for attending the Last Drop Water Speaker Series. For those of you who don't already know, as I mentioned before, we post our recordings of previous webinars to our website, which is, showcases a range of interdisciplinary water researchers. And so we encourage you to go to our website and take a look at those archive videos, and as well to stay tuned for future events that we'll be hosting. So thank you very much to Donghoon Lee and to everyone for joining us here today.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Thank you for everyone.